going live. Hi, welcome everybody. Really great to be back. I just have to say that every time I get in the car now, I hear that in my head. I don't even have to turn it on anymore. It's become uh, my songworm of the week, and I love it. It's really great. Anyway, welcome if you haven't been here before. My name is Dina Perlman. I run the Eleanor Perlman Foundation, and also known as DARP. And I'm very, very glad to be here again. I took a little hiatus. I had a birthday. I went away. Needed to kind of nail down some technical things, and I learned Premiere Pro along the way. So forgive me for my video attempts, and thank you all for putting up with that. Anyway, I just have a couple of announcements to make. The most important one is that the Eleanor Perlman Foundation is going to have another symposium in the fall, so it's save the date. I'll only just play a little kind of thing here. Hold on. I had to get rid of the sound because is that ARPS for All is scouting out a couple of new locations. We're still going to be in Boston. That is our primary location, but we're also going to have a secondary location in the New York metropolitan area. I can't say yet. There's a lot of negotiations in a couple of different places, but I'm really excited about that as well. And we are also pairing at the Record Co. with a group called Beats by Girls, which is about teaching electronic music and gear and production and music making to women, and those are really excited about that. That's started last week. We had a little open house at TRC, and we're really excited to see what happens next. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce Shawn Johnson, also known to many of you as Faulty Tenor. He came into my radar quite a while back. I think it was around the time that Cherry Audio came out with the Quadra, though you've been definitely supporting us before then, and we've had some conversations, and he gave me some music to listen to, and I really love what he does, and I said, you have to come on the show, and then of course, life gets in the way of doing things when we want to do them, and so we finally made it happen. So welcome, Shawn.
Wow, thanks so much. It's great to be here. What did I say? I was thrilled, delighted, and honored to even be considered to come on and talk about music and synthesizers and all this fun stuff.
Cool. So you are in Chicago?
I am based in Chicago. It'd be pretty awesome.
My visualization is that every major metropolitan area will have one, but let's see what happens first. I've
And
definitely
LA would probably be the next one, and then
we'll see. You know, I'm waiting for offers. So, so most of you have been here before. We are going to be having little interchange. We're going to talk about Shawn and let him do some talking for a change, and then you're going to play us some music live from the studio, and then people are probably going to want to know about your gear. It's always one of my favorite sections. Show us your gear, show us your studio, and we will open up questions to the audience, so you can pose your questions in the chat. I will do my best to get to all of you. If I miss you and we still have time, please let me know. Give me a little repeat or say, hey, Dina, get with the program and like that. All right, so let's see. Let's start off with I like to always go back to when did this all start? When did you first start making music, as a child or as an adult?
Well, as far as music creation, gosh, probably somewhere after fourth grade or something, I got involved with band and actually playing clarinet, which is interesting. But I mean, before that, I just know I've always liked listening to music. I remember I must have been 9 or 10 years old, and I had one of those Panasonic portable cassette decks, like people had, and it was like, oh, Elton John was like the thing. I was listening to like all these Elton John songs and recordings. So
Did you know that you were listening to synthesizers when you heard, sympathy? What was
like funeral for a friend.
funeral for
I
a
yeah
friend?
probably. And as I got older, and then you start getting like you remember the Columbia House Record Club. I remember I got all these crazy
Yes.
albums with that, and it's like you'd read what was on there and what gear. And I know that was always like a big thing, because when you're young too, you only have so many records at first. Like you have a dozen or 20 records, and you listen to them over and over and over. So it's like, oh, who's this David Henschel guy, and why is he playing an ARP synthesizer, and what does that mean? Like and anyway, it was exciting, and I don't know, it's one of the coolest things still I've ever heard. The fact that that he built it like part by part, track by track, because it was a mono instrument, and that they had to do it that way. It really gives you, as you get older, you get the perspective like, wow, how meticulous that was, that they do it, and it's so cohesive that it sounds like an orchestra almost, but it's like, yeah, it was like one part at a time.
So you were a big reader of the liner notes.
For sure. And I mean, I listen to everything, and that's just probably a big theme with my entire interest in music, is it's like all over the place. Because I remember, like with that Columbia House thing, I had records from like whatever Steve Miller Band, who would have like a Roland synth on there, that what the early modular kind of sounding things, and then there was like I had the Ohio Players. I had all these weird things. It's like far apart genres, but it was I don't know, if I heard stuff I liked, then I got into it.
So did you realize you were listening to synthesizers? You were playing the clarinet as a youth, and then you're listening to all these different sounds. Did you have any interest in synthesizers at the time, or was it sort of? Tell me your how you got to that place.
Well, I mean, I had some piano lessons when I was younger that didn't really take or whatever. But like we had a piano, like an upright piano, so I would always like noodle around and figure out things by ear. But it was all. So I was on clarinet, and then when I got into high school, I kind of switched to saxophone. So everything was all about saxophone and jazz and all of that, and listening to whatever Maynard Ferguson, Chuck Mangione, and then I got into like real jazz music, which was like Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, and all that stuff. So I kind of had blinders a little bit, but then there was electronic instruments and all that stuff. I mean, if you think about it, whether you're talking like electric bass guitar, keyboards, etc. All of those bands did that. And I heard stuff too, like Weather Report. I remember 830 was probably one of the early jazz albums that I had. And like I didn't have any understanding at all of some of the stuff that was going on. But it was really cool. But it was like, I didn't like the concept was like, well, it was some of it was kind of out there, and like the sonic soundscapes that they would do, the Solomon Dream Up. It was definitely, it reaches you, but you maybe don't necessarily get all of it. So at
How did
first, I mean, it takes you, yeah, there's a certain amount of, musical acumen you have to fully appreciate it, I think.
how did you get
And
turned
then as
on
you
to
get older,
jazz? Because I think you're about my age. It sounds. So how did you get turned on to jazz?
really from playing in jazz band in high school and all that, I
So it was
kind
a
of got roped
progression
into that.
jazz
So
band, and
our band director, who was really a pretty formative influence on my life at that point, he was kind of a jazzer. So it was like he was kind of nudging me in this direction. I remember him giving me some tapes that had stuff on there, and it was like whatever. Eddie Harris was on there, and it's like I never heard anything like that before. He played like altissimo stuff that was like, like only dogs can hear or whatever. I'm being silly, but it was like, wow, that was like, I never heard, there's all these things that just open up your ears and are exciting. And then you just get more into it. And then I wanted to study music. So in college, I studied music education. So then you basically around musicians all the time. And there's always that whole thing you go over. And then it's like, oh, who's got what records and what are you listening to? And everything just branches out like a tree at that point.
Yeah, yeah. So you're lucky to have someone who influenced you back in high school. That's you're very lucky. I think that those influences build the roads that we go down. There's such important place to have people like that in our lives. Do you? So you mentioned some of the people that you were interested in. How did the transformation come from playing traditional wind instruments to synthesizers? Because everyone will see later, and I've mentioned it in your bio that you play synthesizers through a wind controller.
Yeah, so there's an evolution there, but I mean, if we go back to when I was in high school, then I was getting interested in doing more keyboard stuff and whatever, electronic keyboard. But at that point, like any kind of serious instrument, was pretty cost prohibitive. It wasn't going to happen. So like I had a Casio or whatever, and I could kind of figure some stuff out on it. But it was like, fully programmable, but it had maybe like 8 good sounds. It wasn't really that good.
Yeah.
But but that sort of piqued my interest, and then things became, more affordable or whatever. Then I eventually got like a Korg DW8000 when I was in college, and I did stuff with that. But so that was like the first synthesizer I had. But as far as doing the getting into the wind control, it's really interesting because my background in college was so much all like playing in bands, big band, and all that with the school stuff. But then I would jam with rock bands and all that too. There was a few local bands that would play at bars and that, and I'd kind of be like the guest person coming in, blowing sax or whatever. Not too much keyboard at that point. And then, I was really into doing all the acoustic music still, because of whatever my just joking indoctrination with the music school. And so it ended up happening after graduation. I was kind of like solely focused on all this acoustic stuff. So that was probably the point where I should have gotten into the electronic world more, but it kind of didn't. And then I came around to it really late. I mean, in the last few years. So like in 2018 or so, that was when I ended up getting the wind controller and exploring everything. And that was one of those deals that, in being in contact with other people, and I was interested in, I was doing home recording stuff at that point. People started talking about, oh, well, there's like you use laptops and everything. There's like plugins you can do stuff with. It's like you don't have to have a whole room full of gear. And I know, like, I have a pretty small footprint to my setup, which is important because like I don't have like a dedicated space or room to really do all the synths. So that was really helpful. And I kind of got into it sort of backwards from there. So it was like, I was playing all saxophone and all that for years. And then, in 2018, well, I was trying to digitize the saxophone and do like pitch to MIDI conversion, and that was kind of cumbersome, not really that good. So then I was like, I think what I just need to do is get a wind controller, and then I kind of was hitting the used market for that. And then I have a Implement of Destruction Yamaha WX7 wind controller, which they don't make these anymore. It's kind of a sort of vintage thing now. I guess these are from the late 80s, early 90s was when the run was, probably more late 80s. And this is like a real instrument. It's got an aluminum body, key for every note. So it's essentially a MIDI controller, but it has a wind or breath pressure sensor. And then that's really all the magic happens, basically, because, if you're playing on a keyboard, like if you were the great George Duke or Herbie Hancock, well, they're manipulating all the controls. And I mean, if you watch videos of them playing, it's like George Duke is all over the place, adjusting all the specific settings to get all the expression that he gets, which is vast. I mean, it's amazing how much he could coax out of the instrument. But then when you're using breath control, it's a great cheat or shortcut, because it's a very natural, organic thing to use breath if you're already a wind player. And I mean, breath controlling the filter immediately humanizes the sound. I
Yeah,
always say it's kind of like the DNA fingerprint in your music, because like even among wind controller players, no two people kind of do it the same way. The conception is always a little different, and depending on who you listen to and what your approach is. And I don't know, my approach is weird because I mean, even though it's basically a woodwind based instrument and fingering system, I would say a lot of the phrasing doesn't follow what you would do on a woodwind instrument. A lot of the phrasing that I do probably is more intervallic. It's just based on the way the controller works and the way the controller is designed. Like, I don't play saxophone that similar to the way I play wind controller. This stuff's doing a ballad or something, then it gets kind of similar. But
so before we listen to you live, talk a little bit about the piece that we heard. Those people that were in the beginning, and if you missed it, I definitely encourage you to go back to the YouTube later and listen to it. Called Sneakers. How did you make that? What software did you use? What was your methodology? I really enjoy that very much. I have to say it again.
well, thanks. So that was a piece. So at some point, I was doing some improvised thing, probably like a YouTube video or something, and I was playing the Odyssey, plugin, and as usually happens, you do like the first 3 or 4 minutes, it's just kind of whatever. And then this idea emerges, which was like the bass line that has kind of that burping quality, because there's automation in the patch. The I don't want to get too geeky about it, but like
Don't
the
get
coarse
geeky.
frequency, it's it's a sync patch, and the coarse frequency, there's automation because it's why I have it. I can scroll up and you can see or can you? Yeah. So this is the ARP sequencer that's in the background of the Korg app. And then if you look at where all the knobs go all over the place, and I tweaked them a little bit, and I probably changed the speed to fit the tempo of that number. But basically what happens is it modulates the coarse pitch of the second oscillator, it causes overtones to jump out and all that.
Oh,
So then what I figured out is, well, if you're playing the bass line, if you push with the breath pressure at the same time that the coarse frequency gets modulated, that's how you get the burping effect. So you get like I think this is on. It probably isn't. It is now. So as opposed to it just being, you can kind of hear it squiggle a little bit when the modulation happens, but if you push the filter at the same time, it's like alive, it's fun. And that the entire genesis of whatever that idea was solely just based on learning to play the sound. And it was like, oh well, but if you push here, it's like it jumps out at you. It's kind of amazing. And it's really, that's probably one of my favorite of any synthesizer sounds I've ever performed on, because it can be almost anything, because if you don't push it so hard, it could be like real gentle and all that too. It's a really well programmed sound, and you could also turn off the automation if you don't want that going on. But
so tell me what you're going to play for us.
basically I try to come up with just a sequence of different things. Some of them are based on pieces that I've improvised or recorded before, and then I don't have a real specific thing. I mean, I kind of wrote down what sounds. You can't read it because of the bright light, but I kind of wrote down what sounds I was going to use, and trying to come up with a sequence a little bit that would kind of just show a variety of things. So if we're probably going to do that first, and then you want to talk about the gear, is that the
Yeah, we'll
flow
talk.
that we want
Yeah,
to go?
yeah. Let's enjoy it for what it is, and then we'll and then I I never like to read reviews until after I've seen a movie or read a book. And so I feel that sometimes some people think it adds, some people think it detracts, but all right. Are we ready?
More or less. And actually, our conversation, I decided to start with something different that I wasn't going to do, but.
Good.
Okay.
Wow, first of all, congratulations. I think you have achieved what we've been trying to achieve for a long time, and that is to have sound good on a live stream with the with the Alan Perlman Foundation. So, applause. That was really tasty stuff. And definitely am curious and about hows and wheres. I saw what is a Korg Odyssey, and I saw the Quadro Cherry Audio Quadro. Is that right?
Yeah, primarily. I'm trying to think. I don't think I used the um yeah, there's a wind. I'm trying to think of what I want to call it. There's a plugin that was specifically designed for like breath control that I ended up not using,
Oh,
which is I'll show it. So the developer actually, if you look at this goofy, um, I'm using Reaper for my live host. It was just easier when to load up 4 or 5 things to use Reaper rather than the other live host that I use. And then what I ended up doing is I dropped in this, but I didn't use it. So this is based on a hardware thing called um, EVI, which is the like electronic valve instrument, and I ended up not using it. But the soft brass or whatever, it's not like I can't get that sound with Quadra. I ended up using Quadra.
and I know that sometimes you used voltage voltage modular as well.
I do. I use that a lot. I didn't use it today only because actually I had it in there and I swapped it out because that takes longer to load. It's like if I close this whole thing and I reload it, it doesn't take too long. But if I had voltage modular in there, it takes longer just because that's a bigger program or something. Which is, I mean, it does a lot. But that's the way plugins are. That's one thing with doing laptop-based music and all that. Certain things load faster than others, and I don't know. There's not necessarily a correlation to me between the audio quality and how long it takes to load either.
Hmm.
Like some of the most amazing sounding instruments don't use that much CPU and don't take long to load. Like so, I had that I just did that patch today, but with the lead that was on my iPad, but it was on. I kind of replicated it on here, but then I just did it on the iPad.
Well,
What
if
did
you
I call
want,
it?
because I'm sure we'll have some questions. If you want to load the voltage modular while we're talking, because definitely I'm sure people are curious about that as well.
Oh yeah, let me close this. I mean that's a fun rabbit hole.
Hey,
And I know when Dan was on your show, I made some comment in the comments about like voltage modular changed my life, and I mean half joking, but what I mean by that though is like I have some axioms about music making, and one of them is everything is modular. So I'm doing all these live host things. Actually, I'm going to pull up my live host so you can see what it looks like. This is the one I usually use. I don't know what's going to come up, but it's whatever I had in there yesterday probably. See, and it's taking. Oh, it's because it's loading the. So I have voltage modular in here as an effect, which I do a lot.
so while
But
that's loading, tell us about any other gear that you have in your studio.
so I'm trying to think of the easiest way you can kind of see this.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a lot of wires coming out here. So what do I have in here? I have a Craft synth from Modal Electronics. It's not plugged into anything, but I use that a lot. And what I do is I'll run that through either my iPad or I'll run it through the laptop and use like a second filter. So what I've found is the craft synth is pretty expressive and it works nice with breath control. But what works really great is you take something like that and then you run it through whatever, like the voltage modular ARP themed filter, or you run it through like a ladder filter, and it's fun too because like if you have like I don't know like if you have 8 patches you use all the time, if you start swapping different filters in and out, then you can make it like 24 different patches, you know what I mean, without
Mm-hmm.
reinventing the wheel. Oh, this isn't even a good that was just like the boring build the filter that comes with the free version. But this is what I use a lot. I use the synth voice module and voltage module a lot because I like the ARP filter sound. It's super useful. How do I describe this? Because like probably the two filters I use the most when I'm processing all these things are like the ladder, which is the classic whatever mini mode kind of deal, and then I use like the ARP based filters. But the the ladder filter tends to be juicier and grainier and it colors the sound more. Well, sometimes I don't want to change the character of it so much, and then I go to that other one. Then I go to the ARP filter because it works really nice and it doesn't change the original character of what you're playing through it so much. But I mean, that's the fun thing about mixing and matching with all these things. You can do that, which is kind of like, that's the thing I got out of getting into voltage modular, which it could just as easily be, like a 2600 emulation or whatever, the same kind of thing. When you start having all these different components, you can mix and match. But it's deceptive because if you looked at like one of my, I'm going to have to turn some stuff off real quick. I think this will still work. I'll find out. Because because I don't have the oscillators turned up. That's why. Maybe it's trickier to do some of this stuff live, but anyway, I can show you what's going on with that. You can kind of see it. If you look at this is like one of my favorite kind of lead patches, and there's like nothing to it. It's like a saw wave. I don't have the second oscillator is probably just a tiny bit to thicken it or whatever, and then it's going straight through the filter, 24 dB, and then I'm not even using the envelope generators or anything. So the entire envelope is basically breath control. You're using breath to shape the note and to do all the expression, and that works really good. I mean, that's one thing I think a lot of the wind controllers do, which I learned from other people, is basically you use like almost like a gate, and then the breath controlling the filter is like the entire envelope or shape of the sound and the timbre and really the amplitude, because if you're opening and closing the filter, you're also, controlling the amplitude that way. So it's like you're just taking one thing, and then in doing that one, thing, which is using the breath to control everything, it's like you're getting all these different functions.
All right. Let me just.
And breath control has been around for a long. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I wasn't sure if you had finished, so I was going to suggest some questions.
Sure, but just to finish that thought, so really breath control is not even like a new thing at all. It's been around since, I was researching this the other day, like the 40s or something was the original attempts to use breath controlled electronic gear. And then there was the Lyricon, which like Weather Report, Wayne Shorter used that. Tom Scott used the Lyricon on some stuff. Steely Dan, there's some Lyricon on there. And, that was basically the predecessor of what I used. I think that they kind of designed the WX7 based on how the Lyricon was sort of constructed and works. And then you get to whatever, the late 70s, and then that's where the great inventor Niles Steiner came up with what became the Akai wind controller, which is like the thing that Michael Brecker used, which, I mean, that talking about recordings, like whatever that was, 1986 Magnetic Steps Ahead came out. I mean, that completely changed like everybody's lives that was doing like saxophone and maybe thinking about getting into wind controllers, because all of a sudden here's somebody who had like the most amazing technical facility on the saxophone that you'd ever heard. And then like within a year, he learned how to play wind controller with like the same ridiculous level of imagination and facility. It wasn't just all technical either. It was all these things. And, he worked with other people, there was programmers that worked with him and came up with stuff. And it was just like, I think almost everybody that I know probably that plays wind controller, except for maybe the kind of real old school guys who've been doing it since the 80s, a lot of people took it up because of Michael Brecker and what he did. not that you necessarily want to try to, like, nobody can do what he did, but it just shows you that it's like, oh, you can play acoustic stuff and you can do electronic stuff and you can do whatever. You don't have to be kind of pigeonholed into
Oh, there should
any
never,
one thing
I don't
versus
think
the
anyone
other.
should ever isolate themselves to one or the other. I mean, there's just a beautiful piano piece that Laurie Spiegel, um, a performance of her work on piano, and everyone knows her as an electronic composer. So
And that,
Eliane
and I think
Radier,
all my favorite musicians have those qualities. I mean, if you were going to talk about Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, whoever, it's like, yeah, they played all the straight head acoustic stuff. They did all the electronic stuff. They did the
exactly,
funky stuff. George Duke, he could do it. I mean, there's nothing he couldn't do. Played with
exactly.
Frank Zappa, and then he does all these jazz things, and it's just like whatever it was. They did all their homework. They knew the styles. They knew all the repertoire, and they just killed it. But we can go into the Q&A.
Um, um, hello, hello. So some people are coming and going. This is great. I wanted to open up questions to the audience. I know there were a few people were fascinated by the controller, so this would be a great time to ask Shawn some questions. There's been a lot of kudos coming. Beautiful playing. Bravo, Shawn from Jim Blue. We have folks from the UK, folks from Boston and LA and Las Vegas. And I'm not sure we have anyone. All right, so let's see. Let me go back for a moment because I thought I saw something here. Here we go. So, Thorsten Heinz, I'd like to know how you decide which real hardware to get and which a VST. He also has a footprint problem, so space is precious.
So I'm primarily using plug-in based things. But I mean, to me, I mean, if you're using an iPad or if you're using a laptop, I mean, it's still hardware, you
Yeah.
know. So I don't, I don't really make much of a differentiation. I mean, I think that's the thing too. I'm real pragmatic about all this stuff. It's like, well, if it works, I use it. If it doesn't work, I try something else. And that's a nice thing with the software based things is that especially a lot of them, you can go in and demo or trial. And with wind controller, it is a specific application, so you'll find sometimes things don't work so well with breath control, and then you just try something else. But as far as I don't know what hardware to use, I mean, it's figuring out, I guess, what works, with the controller or whatever that you're using. So I know with the wind controller, some instruments work better. For example, I know that craft synth that I held up, and I didn't talk about what's in the rack bag I have here, but I have a couple audio interfaces. I have a couple MIDI interfaces, and I split the MIDI signal so it comes out of the Yamaha WX7, and then I can go to 3 different destinations. So like one signal was going to the iPad at the same time, the other signal was going into my laptop over here that you can't see, which is running the live host thing, which is that. So definitely, it's kind of signal routing and all that is a big thing with doing all the plug-in based stuff. But in terms of gear, like I use the clackety clack Yamaha controller. Some people use the Akai based controllers, which is like it's electronic, touch sensitive. In other words, if you touch the key, it plays a note. You're not pushing a button down. It's like it's metal, and through the skin conductivity, that's how you get the. I made the decision when I jumped into all this based on advice and guidance from different people. It was like, well, if you want something that feels more like a saxophone, I mean, it's not the same thing, but the mechanical controllers are a little bit more similar because like if you have a habit of resting your fingers on the keys or whatever, then you have to unlearn that. And I was like, I think I'll go with something that has a little bit less of a learning curve. And that's worked good. I mean, if you think about it, so I only got this in like February or something of 2018, and it took me, I mean, really to feel like I was, I don't know, doing anything that sounded really good or creative. It took a while, I mean, I could do some basic stuff or kind of play through songs that I knew pretty well, but there was definitely a process of exploration and figuring out what worked and what didn't and all of that. And I kind of sort of got into all that ambient stuff just by accident because I was just messing. Like I would just do these things where I'd be like, oh, well, what can you do with the sounds and mess around with the effects and all that. And then all of a sudden you get these pieces where it's like ambient, but it's still improvised and it's still melodic and all that. Anyway, we can move on to questions. I'm talking too much.
No, no, it's great. I think it's Dan from Cherry Audio. What features are lacking in modern instruments that would make wind controllers even more useful?
That's a good question. I think it varies instrument by instrument. It's like if I was plugging, and it could be hardware, it could be software, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. If I plug my WX7 into a synth, like the first thing that I do is I'm gonna pull up this other one. Plus, it gives you a nice visual too. The first thing that I do is I just kind of test it to see how fast the response is. And what's interesting is I should have my glasses on. I can hardly read my computer from this far away. There we go. I like this. I like this software because it shows you the amount of breath. But I'm not getting sound. That's so weird. Well, it's probably because it's mapped to another controller.
I jinxed it. I shouldn't have said everything was working so well.
Well, I usually use a different interface. I have like a really old audio interface I usually use with this computer, but then I switched them because my newer one sounds better. So like the first thing I do is be like play these really short staccato things, and it's like you can tell if there's like a lag or delay at all. And I mean, if it's very laggy, forget it. I don't even want to mess with it. Not that I have to play things that are like super fast, but it's like, I don't know, once you know how you use the instrument and what you expect from it, it's like if there's things that are essential for me to be able to do, which I like to be able to do that. So that's the thing. And then as far as being able to start a note from absolute zero, that's a big thing. I know with some instruments, and it could be hardware, it could be software, you get like a bump or a tick on the attack, and that's definitely prohibitive as far as musical expression, because it's like every time I hear it, it's like, I don't know, it's like somebody stepping on your foot or something. It definitely kind of throws you off or whatever. So those are some of the things, and then beyond that, then you just get into, well, what does it sound like? What can it do? How many voices does it have? Doesn't necessarily have to be polyphonic. So one of the things that I did, I was going to acknowledge this. So when I was playing with Quadra, and I had there's an app called Streambiter, which is running a script that's what you call a MIDI rotator. I totally did that because it's like, okay, the non-wind synth players always love that kind of stuff. And what that basically is that's something that this person, Robbie Kilgore, invented working with Michael Brecker. I think originally on the Oberheim expander, where you would like play one note on a keyboard, and Lyle Mays used this a little bit too. You play one note on the keyboard and it harmonizes it to 4 different pitches at different intervals above the fundamental. Well, what it also does is, like, if you have like 5 notes, it'll play 3 or 4 at a time, and it rotates. So you get this like motion that happens. Like if you play the same note, it voices it out different ways. If you keep playing like middle G or something. And anyway, it's really cool. So I included a little bit of that. But yeah, all these capability things, are definitely, the differentiators when you're like shopping around and looking at stuff. So, I mean, I use some things that are poly. Plus, I do play a little keyboards, or I plunk chords out, or you'll do things that, you create something like a pad to play over. So I definitely like to have, polyphonic and monophonic things. But I mean, really, the attack, how responsive the instrument is to breath control for me, and then it's just this, after that, really just the sound. How good does it sound? What are the range of timbres that you can get out of it? And there's some instruments that maybe don't have such a great range of timbres, but it sounds so good, then you'll use that. Then you have other things that could come up with all kinds of, different sonic things that you can do. And I do gravitate a lot to the virtual analog kind of things, or the kind of old school sounding things, because that's just partly because that's what I like, I suppose, and then partly because I feel like you get really good expression using those kind of instruments, as opposed to you start getting into trying to map breath to wavetable things, and you know what? It never sounds as good as a one oscillator saw patch where you're opening and closing the filter with breath, which is like, it's kind of ridiculous that you could have this, oh, well, we have the 1990s technology with like Korg M1 or Wave Station, and I have those things, but then what, the apps for those, and what I ended up doing is I'll use them for a pad or something, but I never play them with the Wind controller ever.
So
like if you try it and it's disappointing, and then it's like I move on, that I'm like, yeah, but I could just use Odyssey and it sounds like great every time I play it. Why wouldn't I? Like, if I only had like one or two synths to play, I could get pretty deep into it. You know what I mean? It's not like I have to have a zillion different sounds. I think most of the players that probably we all listen to, if you really break it down and you think about it, like on a record, I don't know, George Duke, Jan Hammer come to mind. Like, how many different lead sounds do you really hear them use? There's like the square one, there's the saw one, there's the one that has more of a punchy or plucky kind of sound. I mean, it's crazy. It's like the same, and some of that was because they originally were using a Mini Moog or something, or a 2600, and it was like, okay, they had it basically set up to do like the sound, and maybe they switched which waveform was coming out of the oscillator to get the second one, and that, but that, that's what they all do. Alan Zavad, same thing. You see him on the 2600, and it's like, yeah, he's playing the saw or whatever. It could be whatever sound, doesn't even matter, because it's him and all the expression that he brings into it, and he's going to take that one sound and make it so beautiful and amazing. Because that's the thing. I think it's just like playing a saxophone, and that's probably informs my opinions about all this too. Is it's like, whatever the sound is, if it's a good sound, you just play the sound. That's where what I mean. You learn how to play the sound, and then that's where the good stuff happens. You start overthinking it too much, I think that's where it doesn't work as good.
Then you don't have happy accidents if you overthink it. David Sverchek says we all fell into ambient, Shawn. That was just a comment that I wanted to share with you. All right, so we have time for just one more question before we head out from today's episode. So if there's any other questions, we just had some people join us later. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Sometimes things go by me. Looking for it. I guess there's no more questions.
One thing I would say, when you look historically at what's happening with all this stuff, there's so many like wind synth players now. I mean, I can't name check everybody because there's just way too many of them, but it's like I have all these comrades that are doing all this like amazing music, and I think there's a lot of inspiration that gets exchanged between everybody, because people have different gear or different like workflow, and like everyone kind of watches what everyone else is doing, and it's like, ooh, that's cool. Oh, how did you do that? And yeah, there's such a community, I think, of us, even though there's not, I mean, I don't know how many, like if there's 80,000 people in the general synthesizer group, there's like 2,500 people in the wind synth group. But boy, those 2,500 people, I don't know, it's good to be in a smaller group, I think. I mean, there's probably a lot of good information that gets shared that way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that sounds like something I'd like to learn more of because I'll be honest with you, I did not know so much until we met, and I really finding it gratifying to see this wonderful, expressive method of making music, and it's really aligned with what my father believed in, that your limitations of making music should not be limited to your expertise at a particular instrument. So he created the synthesizer with that idea of opening up possibilities and showing the possibilities that you have with wind controllers and the different types of VSTs and is really eye-opening. I think it's really eye-opening, and I'm really appreciative of the time and wonderful stuff that you're doing. Again, if you missed the beginning, I definitely encourage you to go back and check out the first song. We're going to end with, okay, oh gosh, it's Land of the Night Crystals. And just let's close with you just telling a little bit about this. Is an interpretation, a collaboration.
So yeah, so this is a collaboration with Australian music producer Benedict Roff-Marsh, who I just know from some of the music discussion groups, and we were talking about different things with synthesizers, and he's really into it, and also does a lot of production work. And then it just kind of came up. Oh, I'm working on this thing. I have the concept. I don't have all the music put together, but he's like, what if you play some wind synthesizer? I think that would be fun. And then, yeah, it kind of just grew from there. So originally, I think he was just going to use me on the one track, and then I sent him some stuff. So the remix track that I did is just basically the original guide track that he gave me, which is pretty close to I think what the final version was. And then it's the passes that I recorded. I think for something like three or four out of the 4 or 5. And then what I did was I just spread them out because it's interesting when you hear the different passes together. I like there was almost like you know contrapuntal or something, and that was just what the collaboration was. And then so basically so it's an album that he released on, well, I guess Bandcamp, and what is it? There's like 5 tracks or something, and there's 2 really long tracks, and those are the ones that feature the wind controller.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to play that in a minute. There is one more question, and I think I'm just going to let's see if we can answer this quickly and before we listen to uh, Land of Night Crystals. And David would like to know what is next. What is next on your agenda?
Well, I have a lot of things going on. So I actually work a full-time job. That's basically consulting, healthcare benefits related. And of course, I also have a large family. So there's always a lot going on with that. Um, I mean, I do have some aspirations to try to get like a release together of probably some kind of ambient project, but I'm still in the brainstorming process. I'm hoping maybe to have something together by the end of the year. And what was the concept I had was kind of like scene stealer, which is just the idea of all these like typical scenes you might see in a movie, not unlike some of the names and titles I did for some of the improvised things. So I kind of have a bunch of ideas. I don't even remember what they all were. Like Missed Connection, how like people rush to the airport or something. So maybe something that would be kind of like an agitated piece for that, or there might be some like kind of more pastoral things. And very cinematic is the kind of the idea. And that was a big influence for me too. I know I mentioned Vangelis, but like Tangerine Dream was a big one too. Which I came of age in the 1980s, and you think about all the great soundtrack work and all that they did, and that's definitely an influence. Which actually, going back to the piece that you're going to play, I know Ben and I have a big shared interest in like that Tangerine Dream, Berlin School stuff. Which is a lot of the synthesizer based things. So.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time and for preparing for this and for giving us so much information. This was such a pleasure. And like I
Thanks.
said, I have Sneakers has been the song worm in my head all week, so, which means that it is catchy. It's a catchy tune.
I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. So stick around to hear this last piece called Land of the Night Crystals.